last week.
That time, okay. All right, we'll bring the city council workshop for August 20th, 2024 to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Carter,
Here?
Deputy Mayor Swatman,
Present.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Here.
Councilmember Davis,
Present.
Councilmember Fullerton,
Here.
Councilmember Hubler,
Here.
Councilmember McClymans, and Councilmember Rock.
We get a note from.
We haven't heard anything from Councilmember McClymans. I think Councilmember Fullerton's been trying to get a hold of him.
Right. Councilmember Fullerton, did you hear anything back from?
I'm checking, but no.
No, I'm assuming he's out of town.
Well, I'll make a motion then to excuse both Councilmember McClymans and Councilmember Rock from today's workshop.
So moved.
Second.
Oh, wait a minute. We got somebody up. Wait, somebody's up somewhere.
Oh, he's up there.
Kelly's on my.
He didn't speak up. I didn't hear him. I don't see any yellow thing. He just popped in. So we'll amend that to just Councilmember Rock.
Yeah,
excused from-
Councilmember McClymans, can you hear us?
Looks like it.
Maybe.
Okay.
You're still muted if you're trying to talk.
No, you're good. I can. Well, now.
Maybe he heard us excusing me. and he left.
Right, click. No kidding.
Yeah.
Councilmember McClymans, your mic is muted on your end. You'd have to unmute your mic.
Okay, well, we have a motion and a second to excuse Councilmember Rock. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Very good. I'm sorry. Oh, Deputy Mayor Swatman and Councilmember Baldwin, I think, was a second.
You're welcome.
We have review of council minutes, Councilmember Fullerton and Councilmember Hubler.
I did not see anything.
I did not see any changes.
Okay. Excellent job. Now on to council open discussion. And with that, I have something I'm going to read in regards to what's been going on over the last week or so. Thursday, I received a call from Sumner Bonney Lake School District Superintendent Lori Dent, praising our BLPD officers for an incident at Bonney Lake High School. We had a show of force with at least 6 officers on scene to arrest a student who had made threats and brought a gun to school. This eased everyone's fears on campus, and they were all very appreciative. I know Tony Clark, Bonney Lake High School principal, also called to thank Chief Barry and to praise the professionalism of the officers. Friday, I ordered flags in Bonney Lake to be lowered to half staff in remembrance and respect, excuse me, for retired Bonney Lake Police Chief Frazier, who served the city well over 30 years, over 20 of those years as Chief of Police. He served another 11 years as a CSO, Community Service Officer, where I had the pleasure of working with him. Friday night, Como News did a story on the diversity painting being taken down. A former council member assisted the news with their story, and the story was created to divide us. Saturday morning, the Tacoma News Tribune did a story on the diversity painting with the assistance of that same former council member. That story was also created to divide us. Saturday afternoon, I received a briefing from Chief Barry about a juvenile party that had gone bad the previous night and ended up with a shooting in or near Sumner. 2 Bonney Lake High School students were shot and a 3rd person killed. Bonney Lake police officers, assisting Sumner PD officers, Puyallup PD officers, Pierce County Sheriff's deputies, and WSP troopers pursued the suspect. The suspect rammed one of our Bonney Lake police officers' patrol cars with the officer still inside in an effort to escape. 2 suspects were eventually taken into custody and booked into Raymond Hall. Saturday afternoon, I attended retired Bonney Lake Police Chief Frazier's funeral service in Sumner with retired Chief Jeter, retired Chief McGehee, retired Sergeant McDonough, retired Sergeant Sasaki, Retired Officer Cianotti and former Mayor Flaherty. Sergeant Malum and Officer Wigger served as honor guards. Sergeant Malum provided Donna, Chief Frazier's wife, and retired dispatcher a flag from our grateful city. Sunday morning, I received a briefing from City Administrator Vodopich about a shooting and crash at the intersection of Rhodes Lake Road and Falling Water Boulevard near Victor Falls. Pierce County Sheriff's deputies, Ording PD officers, Sumner PD officers all responded with our Bonney Lake officers. 2 victims were killed, and a suspect was taken into custody after a foot pursuit with Bonney Lake officers. Sunday evening, I received a briefing from City Administrator Vodopich about an incident in Sumner. Bonney Lake officers were assisting Sumner PD with a suspect in crisis. A civilian crisis responder and officers from Sumner, Bonney Lake, Puyallup, and State Patrol responded. After 2 hours of different strategies, negotiations, and less lethal munitions, a suspect potentially armed with a knife was shot and killed by officers with the Bonney Lake Police Department, Sumner Police Department, and Puyallup Police Department. I don't have any more details at this time, but the incident is being investigated by PC FIT, which is the Pierce County Force Investigation Team. Monday afternoon, I was advised of a kill list, possibly directed towards Mountain View Middle School. The list was determined to not be credible, but officers showed up on scene anyway to be viewed as a presence in the area and provide relief to students and parents that any threats would be taken seriously. It appears this may have been part of a TikTok threat that threatens schools all over the country. I stand for law enforcement. I believe this is what this council stands for, and I believe this is what the majority of Bonney Lake citizens stand for. We are rightfully proud of our police department, its officers and staff, and must back our officers. Our officers back us up in our time of need when things get out of control. They put their very lives on the line to bring things back under control, to make the scene safe, to investigate, and bring justice for victims. We must back our officers where and when we can. This just happens to be why I took the diversity painting down. It does not back our officers. The BLM ring divides us. I went on the BLM website because I wanted to make sure I spoke with the most current information. On the first page, it says in all capital letters and underlined, it's still defund the police. I believe in diversity. I believe in the idea that we are a great melting pot. I believe the BLM ring, which just happens to be on the middle finger, is not coincidence. It's a middle finger to the police, which provide for public safety and is the primary role of government. This is why the police are typically 50% of a city's budget. This is our job, provide for the safety of the public. The print is a political piece donated to move an agenda forward, an agenda I do not agree with. Some citizens do agree with it. It's our job as elected officials to make those calls, those decisions. To me, this was an easy decision. I initially allowed it under the art policy and then took it down when it became divisive. To be clear, for anyone to say or infer that a specific council member should represent every citizen is a failure to understand how representative government works. It's often difficult to get 7 council members to agree on an issue. To believe one person must represent the goals and values of over 23,000 citizens is a Pollyanna, unrealistic view of the world. I, as mayor, this council, and the staff of the city of Bonney Lake will continue to work and provide services for all our citizens of Bonney Lake. I would like to thank the staff for their continued commitment to the city and their hard work while people tried to distract and divide us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any further discussion? Or open discussion?
Thanks for bringing some tears.
Yeah. Okay. No further discussion. See where we are here. Yes. Okay. I hope he doesn't have any questions.
What do you think?
I don't know. He has a lot of input.
Seeing no other discussion, we'll now move on to our discussion items. Madam Clerk.
The first one, I just wanted to bring up that we, next week, you guys had on the schedule to choose a representative to represent us on the Conservation Futures and Open Space Advisory Board. As of right now, we have no applications. It closes on Friday. So I am just looking to see what council would like to do. There is the option of a council member filling out the application and being on the board. That is what past council member Tom Watson did. And so he served. I'm just looking to see what you guys would like to do if no applications come in on Friday, by
When's it-
Friday.
When's it due by?
It was due a year and a half ago.
So we did, City Administrator Vodopich and I did a little sleuthing on this deal, and apparently they meet on odd years, essentially for public meetings. Last year, last year they had a half a dozen meetings, open public meetings to go to. They were on Thursdays. I don't think there was any, it was kind of random as far as when they were or whatnot. But if you were available on Thursdays for a few meetings next year, there will probably be some meetings next year because it'll be an odd year. The even years, I think they had one meeting. So there's not a lot to do with it. But it would be nice to have a Bonney Lake representative. We are allowed to have one throughout the deal because we're a population over 15,000 people. So yeah, if since we don't have anyone that is currently applying for it, and if we don't get anyone by Friday, I would hope or think, if there's a council member who would like to do it or wouldn't mind doing it, has a little extra time to be able to do that, it would be great to have some representation there.
I wouldn't mind, but I do have Thursdays where I do PCRC. I'll have CFF on Thursdays, and then Lions Club on Thursday evenings as well, different alternating Thursdays. So I don't feel that I would be able to meet the obligations if it happens to be on one of the Thursdays, if they're going to continue to meet Thursdays. So if somebody else would like to consider.
Yeah, you've definitely got a lot on your plate there.
I'm just kind of looking at their website. I haven't really actually looked at it before and see what it. Just conservation future funds. Like, I mean, I don't mind. By next year, I should be fine on Thursdays. And I can kind of move my schedule around to make it work. I can read more into what it is, but if somebody else wants to do it, they're welcome to. But if nobody else wants to, I guess I can. I don't.
Maybe we could have an alternate, like have somebody say, yes, I'll do it, but then choose an alternate like we do with PCRC.
Yeah.
And then if you can't make it, then somebody else
else
would go
can.
possibly.
Yeah, well, and that would still give an opportunity for Councilmember Rock and Councilmember Kleinmans. We just have to have a decision, obviously, by the next meeting.
Okay.
But knowing that there's some options out there that we could potentially do that this way, I think is what the clerk's looking for.
Okay.
If we're good with that. Are you good with that, Madam Clerk?
We're gonna, if we.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have a council member sit on it, but we'll see who that is next week.
Okay. I have to do the online through the Pierce County.
All 12 pages.
Okay, that'd be
And an
awesome.
interview process and
The
The
smart
board.
sheet that's on the
Whole
web,
thing.
on our city website.
yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Oh, hey,
I'll just fill it out. Look,
There's Kelly.
there.
Hello. And is up.
Hello.
Hey,
Look at
you're
that.
here.
Fancy.
Yeah, sorry, got to use a browser. You can't use the Teams app.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Good idea.
So, Councilmember Kleinmans, I don't know if you heard, we were just talking about the Pierce County Futures Open Space Citizen Advisory Board. We're looking for someone to sit on that. We don't have any applications, but it closes on Friday. And so we're looking to see if a council member would be willing to. It sounds like Councilmember Hubler might be willing to and fill out an application to go there. We're probably looking for maybe two to, as somebody we could appoint and somebody in case they can't make it.
Yeah, I would be an alternate for council member Hoogler if she,
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
But so
Does-
then,
does he need-
Councilmember McClymans would also need to fill out the application. There's an application online that has to be filled out.
I can send it.
That Sadie will send it to you.
perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
When's the deadline for the application? Tomorrow?
Friday,
Okay.
this Friday. Okay.
Okay.
All right. We'll now move on to our last discussion item of the evening. Madam Clerk.
This is a discussion item only for AB 2460, motion M 2460, a motion of the City Council of the City of Bonney Lake, Pierce County, Washington, directing staff to submit the August 2024 version of the community development element to the Department of Commerce and to include in the final version of the comprehensive plan.
Great. Any discussion? Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I just
Sullivan?
kind of some initial thoughts, and then we'll turn this over to council, as this will be primarily council's discussion. As we move through the policies, the way that we would prefer to make changes to the policies is if there's a proposed change, that we at least get a majority of the council kind of giving us the thumbs up. So we're not changing the policy based on one council member's direction when the majority of the council either A, doesn't agree with the change or wants a different change. We don't have to be official motions because it's only a discussion item. But if we at least could get what that change is and kind of head nods and or thumbs up around the table so when we go to make that change, we can. We can go, however the council would like to go through the different materials, we're ready to do that. I brought Lauren tonight. She's our interim planning manager, has been leading the effort while I've been serving as the interim development services director. And so the two of us should be able to answer pretty much most of the questions. If not, we can also circle back if there's detailed questions that we just can't answer tonight. So with that, we'll turn it over to council and the mayor, and we'll be ready to respond to questions. And if you give us the page number in the packet, that would be helpful as well.
I give them a minute to look for pages.
I'm assuming the page numbers in the previous packet.
They're right here. This is the new one for tonight. So,
Mine is 2 pages. Let me look again.
are you on this is, I believe this is tonight's packet. It's on
Yeah,
page
I have the
17.
It's for the 17th.
Yeah. So on page 17 is where the whole entire packet starts. There's 255.
Look back towards page
It's
230, though.
tonight.
That's where the matrix starts that will have the changes from 2000.
What page,
44.
yeah, what page did the matrix start on again? It
It's
was
around
like
230.
330 or
Well, that was
something like that. Okay.
In the new packet, the matrix starts on page 221. And Kelly, Councilmember McClymans, I didn't know how you wanted to walk through your questions that you had emailed me. So I'll defer to you on how you want to do that.
This is the same discussion we had last council meeting, correct?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
but we wanted to table it so that
there were
everybody had a
more
chance to
questions.
go through the
Gotcha.
255 pages.
It was quite a long packet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long packet and it's really twisted up with state and PSRC and a lot of things. And I had a goal to to apply some lean principles and see if there were places that where we had policies and goals in place that were maybe influencing staff or city in a way that is there a way that we can remove some of these policies. And some of the questions I was asking myself while I was going through is, how effective is the city really at doing this? Is this really reasonable? and then of course the legal part, which is the difficult part, right? Is it really required, or how is it being interpreted? The RCWs, um, you know, this is just really difficult. It's really good work, but still, this is the one opportunity to reduce. This is one of the significant opportunities to try to reduce government, which is, as a conservative, is like one of my principles that I try to look at and say, is it necessary? Um, is it useful? Is it a burden, or is it a service? Um, and so that's what I was doing as I went through this. So there were some things where I thought, well, I just don't really know how the city would do that. And if the city doesn't know how to do that, then maybe we should just delete it. So I had a few deletions. But overall, one thing I wanted to look at that was really concerned with, that I was trying to understand the most, is the land use map. It was on page 299 of the previous packet. It's in the report from it's the 2024 buildable lands inventory. It was on page 229 of the previous packet. But when we look at that map, really what we see is, when it comes to buildable lands, there's
We have
really
the
doesn't-
recent packet there, Kelly. I don't know which,
think it's
do we
on
have a
page
reference to
I'm looking.
what we're,
oh,
because
look,
I think most of the people in this room have the recent one now.
I will go look at the recent packet real quick and try to find the same map. So go talk about something else.
You're talking
I'll go
about the
do that.
September 10th agenda?
Yeah.
Councilmember Clyment, are you talking
Yeah,
about the
on
one that's
page
in the
229.
buildable lands report?
Yes. Yes.
And it's labeled 2024 buildable lands inventory.
On
Yes.
page 199.
It's page 199 in the current package.
199, yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
great.
Current packet.
In the current.
In the current
Current one,
packet, yes.
199, current. Now we're on the same page.
Okay, so when you look at that map, there's you look at the map and it tells a story of there's the residential area looks like it's fairly built out, except for a few of the yellow areas there on the west side, and then some of the more wet marshy areas there by Fennel Creek at the base of the thumb, right? And then we have some things in the pipeline, but you look at it and you go, wow, that's pretty it's pretty, there's not a lot of buildable places in Bonney Lake. And I assume that the pink in the pipeline there really is what we're working through with the
Right. And why did, Kelly, if I help maybe here, the top left corner, the school district property, just as an example, how come it didn't end up being colored, whatever? What is that?
We automatically pull out any governmental owned property like school district property. So school district property, city property gets pulled out in that initial inventory. Pipeline projects are projects that we're currently working
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
As of 2020. So the inventory, it's our 2024 inventory, but the base year for buildable lands is 2020. So any project that was considered in the pipeline or possibly under construction is listed as pipeline inventory. It could be built now, but in 2020 it was considered pipeline.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Clymonds is absolutely correct. Under our current zoning structure, most of the residential areas are built out, which is why when we presented the growth strategy back in March, the strategy was to push that high density and all that capacity kind of onto 410, around the Tarragon property, and really use that as our capacity to comply with the state requirements. Because the alternative would have been, if we didn't do that, we would have had to find areas to upzone throughout the city, which would have changed their buildable lands calculation.
Mhm.
So the first pass is, what does your current zoning allow? And this is based on kind of what the current zoning allowed. And then when we have to look for capacity, we do a second pass over it with different zoning, which is what's talked about in those two growth strategy, that growth strategy memo, which is the second attachment. So I wouldn't disagree that the city, from a residential standpoint, is significantly built out in its current development pattern, and trying to find ways to add that required density. The strategy, and this is what's discussed in that growth strategy memo, was to force that density into high density development onto 410.
And this map, the buildable lands inventory future, represents what is supposedly passable in the current plan.
The inventory is based on your current zoning structure, and then there's some industry standards that Pierce County has established through their buildable lands report, which is what establishes the assumptions for if something's considered underutilized or built out. So you have to have, I think it's, you have to have so many acres, you have to have so many, like, for example, you can't, there's a value to building ratio that we look at. So it's an analysis, and then we subtract out, when you're doing the capacity analysis, a certain percentage of the underutilized that will not be used for development, because not everybody's going to redevelop. And that's how you get to kind of this capacity number of what capacity you have in the system.
What was Kelly's objection or not to
I don't know. I was just trying to explain where we got the map.
Yep. Mr. McClymonds?
Yeah,
Did
so
you-
my take on that, my take on that is that as I go through and I'm looking and I'm trying to find things that don't apply, I think I just wanted to validate that, there's a lot of community development goals in here, and the goals really need to really face for the next, until 2049. We really need to work on, that Midtown and Easttown development, and ensure that that gets built out in a reasonable way, and make sure that we preserve, the single family housing that is in the rest of the in the rest of the city. So I was just looking at that, and that's the way I was looking at the goals as I went through. I'll probably be done later this week with the complete review of everything. But there are things I would like to delete, and many of them are just because I look at it and I go, well, it might be good. I don't know if the city can do it, or it's really not necessary anymore because this city's built out from a residential standpoint. We're not really going to be adding any significant inventory for residential unless it's the high density residential that's in the pipeline.
So you're not suggesting any changes to this map, is what you're saying, right?
No, that's right. I just wanted to make sure we all looked at it so that when
Yeah.
we have the discussion that, we really kind of digest what it's telling us overall, right? Because looking at that, I was like, okay, it was very, very obvious that our future really is in Easttown and Midtown.
And one thing I would say is, sometimes we put policies in because we're required to have that policy to meet either a state law or an RCW or and we can get into that. We discuss specific policies, but that's just something to consider. Sometimes there's policies there in order so that we can meet our requirement to be consistent with the Growth Management Act or Vision 2050. Is there any sort of policy you want to start with, Councilmember McClymans?
Yeah, let me make sure I can reference your page numbers. So give me, let other council members have a discussion, and I'll try to find the current pages or the page numbers in the current.
Councilmember Hubler.
When you say underutilized, what does that exactly mean in all these green?
Yeah, so I was looking for that in the buildable lands because trying to remember all that stuff is tough.
In between acres and.
Yeah, if you go to page 180 in your packet, it starts talking kind of how we look through what when we're looking at things to pull out. So you're looking at parcels that when they're underutilized, it means in theory they could be redeveloped,
Okay.
right? They could be redeveloped with additional housing units. They're big enough that they could be short platted, but it's not just because there's twice the amount of density. It's higher than that, and so it's just walking through that. And then what you do at the end of the day is when you're doing the calculations, you're subtracting 35% of that area, assuming that it will never get redeveloped. And so there's a further deduction when we're doing the calculations.
Okay.
And how they walk through that whole thing kind of is on in the buildable lands report, and we can get you specific numbers from the buildable lands report, but it looks at what's the size of the lot, what's the building to land value ratio, and how much development could occur. And I think it has to be 2.5 times what's currently on the property to be considered underutilized.
I know that down here off Evangeline Road, one of the underutilized green areas is actually like a little farm. Because I can hear their sheep and their horses.
Mhm.
And just because we list it as underutilized doesn't mean they have to do anything. It's purely a mathematical calculation.
Okay.
What does the zoning allow? What is currently on there? Could you redevelop with more? Yes or no?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't force you to do anything. That's still the owner's right to whether they want to redevelop their property. It's just a mathematical calculation to determine if it's redevelopable.
Okay, thank you.
Like a lot inside of Sky Island would not pop as underutilized because it's fully built out. You can't redevelop those with more units.
Councilmember Baldwin.
But just if the homeowner ends up, or whoever the landlord is ends up not having that, then the zoning would have reflected a change. And then if somebody were to then buy the property, they could then essentially develop it the way that, okay, yeah.
And that's why when we do the calculation, we don't assume every underutilized parcel will redevelop because property owners may not want to develop their property. They may not want to sell. And so I think there's a market reduction, and I don't have all that because we haven't been doing buildable lands for about a year now. So I don't have all those numbers right off the top of my head, but there's a market rate reduction that we apply to it as well, assuming that a certain percentage of what's considered underutilized would not reach the market to be redeveloped. It doesn't indicate anybody's doing anything. It doesn't mean they have to do anything. It's a way of trying to evaluate capacity.
Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, so I did notice that several new existing things were added for 2024 that were not in 2015. And in the notes over there on several of them, it says added to comply with HB 1220. What is HB 1220?
So HB 1220 stands for House Bill 1220, and it was a law passed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 21. So 3 years ago, that was a really big amendment to the Growth Management Act, specifically the requirements for your housing element. And that House bill is what created the amendments that made us do the income bands, required the racial disparate impacts, required the housing equity report. So a lot of the things that you're seeing in here for the first time were mandated with the adoption of 1220. And then the state funded that update through funding through the Department of Commerce, which required us to then comply with that the new requirements of 1220.
Thank you.
What page were you on?
So starting on about page 240, 248, 249 right there, I think is when, there's several of them that have that same note on there. That's why I was curious. Actually going even back even further here.
Oh, and if you look at page 131 of your packet, in the comprehensive plan, we actually explained what 1220 was and how it impacted it impacted our comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Because it either produced a actual RCW or a WAC is associated with that, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
And it just, in our world, we've all been focused on House Bill 1220 because it was the biggest change to the Growth Management Act
Sure.
that I have seen since I've been doing planning, and it's the one that we have all been struggling with how to address. And that's the one that created, like I said, the income bands, the requirement to do the housing equity report, the disparate income, racial disparate impacts for housing, and provided that Commerce provided housing by income band to us.
But that again produced a
Yes.
law.
Yeah, it's all
We're following a new law.
Yeah, so it all got codified
Yeah.
in RCW 3670A, which is the Growth Management Act. I want to say 070, the mandatory requirement. Yeah, 070 primarily where the mandatory requirements live.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fullerton.
So on page 232 of the matrix, there's, we didn't have anything for this policy, so it was added to the left side. It says allow for the citing of essential public facilities as required by state law. What is an essential public facility?
If you give me a second, I will. And we pretty much already have everything in our development regulations to deal with essential public facilities. So while there would be a change to the comprehensive plan, there wouldn't be a change in the land use matrix because that's already been addressed. But I can give you the list. I will tell you, you're probably not going to like the list, but it is what the definition of essential public facility is.
And I think the note on that one too says added to comply with XXXXXX. Do we probably have that reference or something at some point, right?
Thanks.
Something.
Page 232 CD-LU-612.
Councilmember Fullerton,
Yeah.
essential public facilities include those facilities that are typically difficult to cite, which include airports, state education facilities, state and regional transportation facilities as defined in RCW 4706-140, regional transit authority facilities, which is Sound Transit, state and local correction facilities, solid waste handling facilities, opioid treatment programs, including both mobile and fixed site medication units, recovery residents, harm reduction programs, including safe injection sites. Excluding, thank you, Lauren, excluding safe injection sites and inpatient facilities, including substance abuse disorders, mental health facilities, group home, community facilities, and secure community transition facilities. So that's what the state defines as essential public facilities. They are the things that we have to have in a society that nobody wants in their community. So there is a presumption in state law of how we have to deal with those. Our development regs have already addressed that. We just didn't have a policy. So the policy was then updated to reflect that we would follow state law as it relates to the siting of those facilities. And I was reading from RCW 3670A 200.
Councilmember Fullerton.
Yeah, so, okay, so then you look at our map here on 199, like, where's all this stuff gonna go? We don't have the ability to build out or to add any of these facilities to our current map.
So
I mean,
that's
do
where-
we have a thought on where these buildings could be placed?
Yeah, it's throughout the city. So you could see state and local education facilities in residential neighborhoods, right? That's where you see local schools. That's considered an education facility. Bus stops, those are throughout the city. That's considered part of the transit stuff. So it's not that it's a specific, it could be a property. We don't know where one of the agencies would want to acquire property to build one of those essential public facilities. And then we would follow our land use matrix on how to promote to do this. So if you could bring up. So, so for example, transit facilities are allowed in every zone. State transportation facilities are primarily East Town, Midtown, downtown mixed, and public facility zone because it's primarily 410. Airports is East Town and it's listed as a conditional use. I don't think you would ever see an airport in East Town because it's not big enough, but we still have to plan for it. Correctional institution is East Town and public facility. Solid waste is handling facilities is East Town. And then the psychiatric and substance abuse facilities is East Town and Midtown core. And then group homes is pretty much any residential zone, which is what we're required to do. And then the secure community transition facilities are in East Town as well. We've identified zones where they could possibly be located and then the permitting requirements under which they would have to operate.
As per state law.
As per state law.
Yeah.
And so when you're, and I've had to do this with essential public facilities, when we did the SCORE facility, when I worked for the city of Des Moines, that was considered an essential public facility. So we had to process it through the city of Des Moines essential public facility requirements. And the difficult part for those processes is when you're doing the permitting, you're not allowed to ask why they chose that location. You just look at how do you mitigate the impacts. You can't challenge the siting decision.
And I see Councilmember McClymans has his hand up now.
So is it,
Yeah, so can you go to CDH2? It's on page, it's in the matrix. On page 246, CDH 4.2. This one was troubling and I suggested deleting it because adopting regulations to require relocation assistance to households that are displaced by new development or capital improvements. So this seems to me like this is asking the city to act as an agent on behalf of a displaced citizen to compel another agent to provide money. Is that what's going on there?
yeah. So one of the requirements, and let me finish where the requirement comes from, and then we can provide kind of what. I can answer this one real quick.
Four point 2 and 4.3, kind of the same kind of concept, right, Kelly? But they're going to lead you back to state law where he's going to dig up some state law that says that we have to do that.
No, let me finish.
If there's
So-
a state law, why do we need a goal or a policy for it? I mean, there's
To support the state law.
No, what it is under the state law, we have to find ways
CW on the line.
to prevent or lessen the risk of displacement. This is one option that the council can consider. And as I've said, the policy should always be read with should consider. So even if we have it as a policy and we don't eventually enact it, that is okay. The council could remove the policy, but then we would have to find other ways that we are addressing displacement for when redevelopment happens. So the theory behind it is if a developer comes in and displaces a bunch of housing that is currently affordable to build housing that is no longer affordable, that they help those tenants relocate. And a lot of this really comes also out of the mobile home parks. So a lot of the challenge we have with mobile home parks is those units really can't move because they're too old. Most new mobile home parks won't accept those models any longer because they are so old. And when you live in a mobile home park, there's either two ways you could do it. You either rent the spot and own the home, which is a lot of them do. And so when it gets redeveloped, they own this thing, the mobile home, but it can't go anywhere. It just gets demolished, and the tenant is out the value of that mobile home. And so the theory is, as you develop those things, the developer who's making the profit of redeveloping that property assist with those tenants to relocate them somewhere else. Hold on a sec. It is a question that we have been asking on SEPA since the 1970s. When we do it for capital projects under the lag manual, it's something we're already required to consider. The council could pull the policy out. It's not one that is specifically mandated. It is one of the strategies we were identifying to how we were going to mitigate the impact of displacement. There's other policies we could consider in lieu of this one if the council would like.
So just to show that, practice some active listening here. So what I thought I heard you say is, one, this is to address a requirement in the GMA section that forces us to address the displacement. But this is just saying this is a mechanism, and the council will still have to vote on this solution if we choose to implement a regulation.
That is correct.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem to be, doesn't seem to be optional.
Well, it's optional in the sense that it's the strategy we picked. We could also pick another strategy. You could also make, so for example, if you're concerned about the mobile home parks and the tenants who have purchased their mobile homes and they haven't had a chance to, they don't have a chance to move those, you could tailor it to mobile home parks. You could change the policy that way. You could require that if before mobile home park closes, that the tenants are given 2 year, you have to give a 2-year notice before mobile home parks close, so that you can purchase the mobile home, people who live there have a chance to compete to purchase that mobile home park, which has been done throughout the region. So there's different policies the council could select. This was just one that we thought was doable. But if the council feels that it's not doable, it's not something that we can't remove from the plan if that's the will of the council.
Councilmember Fuller, do you have a question?
And
Oh,
I was going to say, it's also important to note before every section where we have goals and policies, we added a disclaimer. And what it says is the policies in this section identify action the city should consider over the upcoming planning period to achieve the stated goal. So it's an action the city should consider between now and 2044. And whether the council initially votes and adopts something, that's still to be determined in the future.
not a shall.
Not a shall, it's a should consider.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Councilmember Fullerton?
Well, so I was just reading through on page 236. We had a discussion about this. CD dash LU dash 9.1. So we're talking about reduce the negative health effects of air, noise, and light pollution through regulations and environmental strategies. However, on page 232, we're talking about possibly putting an airport somewhere. That's one of the facilities that we may need have to put in place. So it just seems like a little bit of a oxymoron. And then we have increase access to healthy food for all Bonney Lake residents by encouraging and supporting healthy food retail and partnerships with the local food bank. Or we could just allow for everybody who has even a tiny bit of postage stamp land that maybe we could help them to grow their own gardens, or allow them to have a chicken or something so they can have access to healthy food as well, that they can decide if they want to plant organic vegetables or you know, add chemicals to prevent bugs, but I mean, it seems like these are things that we could allow people to do on their own property, start a little mini farm.
And you can do that right now.
Okay,
This is talking about kind of those solutions that are addressing like what we're doing with the food bank locker program, the partnership we've had with Girls Roots Northwest, that there are people that, don't have land that they can grow a little mini garden on, or they don't have the time to grow a mini garden because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. And so this is saying, as a city, how do we partner with organizations to ensure that, there's an opportunity to have access to healthy foods. And like I said, most of what comes to mind is a lot of the work that we've been doing in partnership with Good Roots
food bank,
Northwest.
yeah, that's.
The sense of the policy, we just identify the local food bank, but in practice, it's been a lot of work we've done with Good Roots Northwest.
Okay, the lockers have been amazing, so, and so that would count towards, like, the lockers and the market from Good Roots would count towards, the healthy food.
Mhm.
We still have to deal with the airports and the air quality reduction.
I'm not really worried about an airport coming to Bonney Lake. I knowing what I know about airports and working in an airport community, there's really not enough space
Come on now, you're thinking.
for a big airport. If this was unincorporated Pierce County and we had the Graham Kapowson area where the state identified an airport possibly should go, I would have a different kind of comment. Sometimes, like I said, that's why I made that introductory comment. Sometimes we have to put things in here because we're required to show that we can do it. Not necessarily do I think that it's going to happen.
So what does it mean on that LU 9.1, reduce negative health effects of air? What does that mean?
So that is one, that is things like making sure that when we do construction projects, we control fugitive dust. It's also
That's already a regulation that's required though, right?
right, but we have to have the policies also.
And that's already, all that would already be, I'm trying to figure out, this is like, I don't know, it appears to be a new one. It's a new proposed goal / policy.
Right, and it's
So what does that mean to the person on the ground if we implement this policy?
I think we already have the regulations on the book, but we didn't have a specific policy in the comprehensive plan. And if you look at the third column over that talks about the MPP, this was added to help demonstrate our consistency with the multi-planning county planning policies to help our certification process.
Councilmember Baldwin.
I say all these things, I just want to say with definitely a grain of salt. I know that you two just work so hard. I feel like there's a third individual too.
There is.
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge that.
Mhm.
These are not directed at you at all. I do think when I'm hearing some of these things and I'm hearing the CDLU, what is it, 9.2 in regards to, 9.3, the healthy food for all, for example. This is just one example.
Mhm.
I guess when did that become the role of government? I don't understand why that is something that we have to actually place in a comprehensive plan goal of a government entity. Like when I think about what is the primary role of government, that is not it.
And so can I answer that in a 2-part answer?
Sure.
So the first part, I think the simplest answer is, as we were developing these policies, we're looking at ways that we can make sure we meet our certification requirement with the Puget Sound Regional Council. And a lot of these policies are adopted in Vision 2050, and we have to have implementing policies at the local level. So from whether the debate on whether it's government's role is, I think, a separate question, but also why are we doing it is the first question. So that's the primary answer.
Let me interject just one thing before you continue. I think the main thing too is when you see these kinds of policies that the legislative body above us is attempting to, put on cities, the question does beg, who does this affect? Who does this actually affect? And so, is this going to create regulations on, businesses that want to give out unhealthy food?
No.
Is this, and then even just looking at the other one with CDLU 9.1 about the effects of air, I think it's really simple to say something with a goal and policy language like that. But to me, that just sounds like, okay, restrictions for business and more red tape.
Gas.
Like that's eventually going to come down as some sort of regulatory thing from government again.
So, so getting any regulations that are passed out of this are passed by the city council, right? And remember, these are things that we should consider to try to implement the goal.
Yeah.
And then we bring forth development regulations. And I'm not saying we will, I'm just saying in general, the way this works. And the council passes those regulations. When it comes to,
Well, but to be fair, a lot of times when someone says, okay, it's getting passed by council through, there's going to be these regulations that we're going to pass through. It's usually like a 400-page packet,
Mhm.
right? And it's slid in. There it is. There's the regulation that slid in. They're not saying that you're doing that, okay? But like, I know that these are requirements by the government. And then you look back as a council and you say, how in the world did that crazy policy get passed? Oh, it was in a 430-page packet that we looked at for a moment for 60 minutes
and I don't disagree with your.
or 1 week. Even.
Yeah, I don't even disagree with your concerns. And so, but I think when we're talking about, increasing access to healthy foods, that for residents and encouraging and supporting healthy food retail and partnerships with local food banks, that is like the work we're doing with Good Roots Northwest. No, we're never going to bring forth a regulation that bans Safeway from selling junk food.
Or tax on soda or anything, we'd never do that.
No, that's not anything that's not anything that
Yeah,
we've ever talked about. It's how do we, when we're,
Wouldn't that be supporting that regulation though? I could say that,
in theory, you
Yeah.
could make that argument, but that's
Okay.
not what we're trying to do. Another example is when we do projects like the View by Vintage, for just an example,
Mhm.
we required them to put in community garden space, right? So that people who are living in that apartment complex that don't have access to a yard to do, their own little garden or farm, there is space within that apartment complex for them to have access to grow vegetables.
So that the developer was required
Yes,
to do the owner of the land.
yes.
seriously? I'm gonna find a community garden plot out there?
Well, it was just for their residents, and they did not push back. They said they think that was a great idea. So if you drive through there, there's
Still a requirement. It was still regular.
I'll be
it was-
interested to see what's growing.
Because you want to build it. This is one thing when the government.
Chief
Fullerton
up there.
or Councilmember Baldwin, that wasn't one that came from a development regulation. It came from a negotiation with the developer,
Using that as a guide.
using that as a guide, but it wasn't
Mhm.
thou shall, it was, have you considered, did you think about? And the developer put that in as part of their project. It wasn't violate municipal code, X, Y, and Z said thou shall. It was, did you consider or did you think? And then Lauren passed me a note as well. And I think it also goes back to Councilmember Fullerton's earlier question is, we want to have policies in there that protect the right for people who do want to do small hobby farms, that there's a provision in our comprehensive plan that says we're encouraging people to do that as well.
Right. I'm totally fine with people deciding for themselves. It's when it's the other way around. When a
Right.
regulation is being put in place, a red tape is being put in place, and people are being forced to do something because there's something that says you have to create healthy food or whatever.
Right. And like I said, the biggest one I can think of that we've done a lot that would be the most consistent with this policy is the work we did with Good Roots Northwest to locate the lockers on city property. Right. That is a way that we are partnering with local food banks. And I think it's also important that it says partnering in here. So it's not talking about adopting a regulations. It's talking about the city partnering with organizations to help the less fortunate have access to healthy foods. It's not talking about adopting regulations that tax soda or ban X, Y, and Z or development regulations. It's talking about partnering with other agencies and retailers to support those goals of providing food access.
And I think Councilmember McClymans has a question.
And Hubler, Councilmember Hubler.
Okay, if he's waiting, let's go to Councilmember Hubler.
So in that 9.3, just the way I'm reading it, it's not telling us we have to do anything for us as a city, but it's just like you're saying, trying to say is like it's partnering with or supporting. There's not even like a partnership other than like maybe it's the land that we allow them to use for the bin things, the little lockers. So is that kind of the same concept as like, our community garden? People be able to use that
Yep.
more or
Yeah, the community
growing that
garden.
more?
Yeah, the community garden the city owns, we maintain that. That would be an example of us partnering to provide access to healthy foods. Lauren passed me a note. It could be the city working with farmers to have a farmers market in the city. So it's not necessarily a regulation that we're trying to achieve here. It's trying to find ways to provide access to things through partnerships. So our community garden is an example. The Good News Roast is an example. And then doing a farmer's market is an example. So just because there's a policy doesn't mean that there's going to become a corresponding regulation that could be, Lauren said, a cooking class at the rec center. How do you cook healthier Mediterranean food? Or, it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a policy equals a regulation.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Did he want to say something?
Councilmember McClymans, you still have your hand up. Are you wanting to speak?
Yeah, I am. But since you were talking about LU 9. I was going to wait until, because I'd like to go to PR 1,
So are we,
PR
Before-
1.4 and 5.
before we move on, Councilmember Baldwin, does that answer your questions, lessen your
I mean,
concerns?
it's just, it's the principle of it, really. It's not the fact that it's, gardens and cooking classes or whatever. It's the principle of the matter is that I'm not sure why we have to have that in a comprehensive plan government document. I don't know why that's a requirement.
And thank you for raising that. I think that's the question we should be asking is, what should government do? Is this goal something government should be doing? Not that
I think
it's not
people
good.
should be doing it, but
Absolutely.
government?
I guess I have one question kind of to go along with this. So if an HOA has a policy that says, no, you can't have, backyard chickens or, you can't grow your own garden or something like that, would this allow homeowners to be able to do something and an HOA not be able to regulate those kind of policies for someone?
No.
No.
So there are two separate spheres of power.
Okay.
So we are not the enforcement agent for HOAs. So we pass our rules that apply citywide. If they say you can have chickens, then the rules that we adopt say you can have chickens, and we as a city would take no action. Okay.
But this could go to the courts.
Right.
Yeah,
But
and then it could be then used against technically an HOA because it's a government regulation.
No. So there's two different things. So that's what I'm saying is there's two different spheres of power.
Yes.
There's our municipal power, our police powers, and under our police powers, we are legally prohibited from being enforcement agents for homeowners associations. So we adopt our rules, and if our rules are in conflict with the HOA, we follow our rules. So if our rules say you can have a shed, we will permit that shed, and you can go build that shed. We will not send code enforcement officers after you because you're in violation of an HOA document. If the HOA wants to enforce their private covenant, which was recorded on the property that says you can't have a shed or you can't have to do anything, that's an action, that's civil action between the property owner and the HOA. Our rules don't come into that legal battle because it's a legal interpretation of the contract that's recorded on the property. So it's a completely, I know they get intermingled, but the HOA is doing a contract enforcement for their covenants, which is a binding contract between the property owner and the HOA. And that's a contract dispute that's handled civilly. And our rules really don't come into play with that. Yes, the homeowner will raise, well, the city allowed me to do it. But really what the courts are looking at is what is in the document that's recorded on the title. And we aren't allowed to, because that's private business, take that up on the city's behalf. So unless the legislature preempts a covenant, the covenant stands. So the only time, so there are certain things where the state has said, even if that covenant is recorded, it's illegal. The one is there's some old plats from back in the 30s that said only certain races can live in this neighborhood. There was a state law passed that preempted those things. The rest of them have not been preempted. So there are two different spheres of issue. One is police power regulation. The other is a private covenant on private property, which is a contract dispute.
And the state also had like things like HVAC, you know, the, whatever it was, the homeowners association said, you know, you couldn't have any outdoor HVAC units. And the state legislature came along and said, oh yeah, you can.
Yeah,
They did things like that.
the state can preempt.
Things.
The state can go in and preempt.
Yeah, but the homeowners association can't, if the city has, you know, you're limited to 5 chickens, the homeowners association can't say, oh, you can have 10.
Right.
That doesn't go that way.
Each level of government can become more and more restrictive. It can't go the opposite
Yeah.
way, essentially.
Yeah.
Councilmember Baldwin.
I wanted to just talk with the council in regards to page 232, going back to CDLU 6.12. This has to do with the allowing for the siting of essential public facilities as required by state law, notes added to comply with quadruple X. Siting really is to fix or build. So really it's to allow for the building of essential public facilities as required by state law. Looking at this a little bit more with a fine tooth comb and looking a little bit more into how this could affect us is, for example, with some of the stuff that's been going on with law enforcement and with drugs and things like that, we have had to find creative ways in public safety to try to follow other cities that are adopting ordinances that protect citizens, regardless of what the state law is saying, so that, you know, people are being protected and are safe. An example of, you know, something like this is the city of Puyallup. They had also adopted ordinances in an attempt to restrict the location of like day use centers and overnight shelters in certain areas of the city. And because of this regulation, they were usurped. And so that's something to think about is, you know, if we adopt something like this, you know, we could have our hands tied in a situation where we're not able to counter with ordinances, you know, to keep people safe. So that's the red flag that kind of goes off for me. Airports is one thing, but you know, some of these other, it's facilities that are unpopular and hard to place in a city. They're difficult to build.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. So we figured out what the triple X was. It's actually RCW 3670A 200, parent 5. And I'll just read it verbatim. No comprehensive plan or development regulation may preclude the siting of essential public facilities.
Repeat.
So it says no comprehensive plan or development regulation may preclude the siting of essential public facilities. So this is one of those ones where we are preempted by the state.
Sure. Yeah.
We have to allow essential public facilities as required by state law and allowed by state law.
Doesn't mean they're unregulated, of course, because I think as Councilmember Baldwin was pointing out, you can have a lot of localized regulations that ensure that they're cited properly.
Yes, we have a conditional use permit process that has specific criteria that would have to be met as the permit review process goes forward for those essential public
I
facilities.
mean, a facility like that, looking at the map that you have there on the document, sorry, I just lost it. What page was that on?
199.
199. Looking on that map, for example, where would something like that go?
Town.
Oh, many places. It depends on what the facility is, right? What
Yeah.
facility are you talking about? Are you talking about halfway home or something?
Let's say it's an
Those-
overnight shelter.
Yeah, exactly. Those can probably go in a variety of residential areas, but they have a bunch of restrictions for away from schools, playgrounds.
So
the-
for our purposes, for emergency shelters and overnight shelters, this was one of the things that we had to add within the growth man, as part of the new House Bill 1220. We identified Easttown and public facility zones as the zone that would support those two essential public facilities.
So we keep it out of residential neighborhoods and away from our schools and things like that. So it would put it basically where all our entire industrial park.
Or any property that's zoned public facilities. So school districts are also zoned public facilities. And that's where you get into that criteria, looking at how far you are from different uses and doing the permit review process.
I mean, there's neighborhoods right behind Easttown.
Mhm. Yeah, there are
On
a
the
lot of
south side.
halfway homes around that people don't realize.
Yeah, no, I do, because I was a foster parent. I'm very
Right.
aware,
Yeah.
very aware.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, so that's how we deal with it. I mean, I'm not saying that this is an easy conversation to have with the council. I've been fretting this conversation all day.
Again, not directed at you, really. I mean
And
it.
I understand that it's anytime I have to deliver the news that, you know, we are precluded or preempted at the state level for certain things, it's never an easy conversation to have. But I think it comes into, you know, the policy isn't going above and beyond what the minimum requirement is of the state law. I guess is the other way to look at what we're trying to do is where's the minimum that the state law requires and are we meeting that minimum standard?
Want to go to Councilmember McClymonds now?
Sure. So can we go look at, it's page 190 in your packet. It's, PR 14 and PR 15. I think PR 14, I don't really understand the value. I see some references to other things, but, you know, it's saying continue working to streamline the permitting process. That's a good thing. Utilizing lean principles in order to effectively process permit applications.
Page
If we're
are you on,
scratching-
Kelly?
I don't think it's 190,
Yeah, which
Kelly.
page?
We're looking for those page numbers right
Yeah,
now in the,
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a.
I have 238 is PR, CD dash PR dash 1.1. Are you still in the matrix?
yeah, so it's in,
Councilmember
Oh,
McClymonds?
sorry. I'm
238.
sorry. It's I'm sorry. I got confused. I'm in the old one. All my notes are in the old one.
Yeah, mine are too.
Yeah. It's page 90.
yeah.
Oh,
Sorry.
90.
And that's in
Yeah,
the
so-
actual that's in the actual comprehensive plan. It's also in the table.
Yeah.
Councilman McClymonds is referencing
Okay,
the actual
got it.
comp plan but policy.
Right. So that, you know, okay. So if I understand what you're doing, you're saying that is meeting a requirement for planning that was levied on us by. But then on PR 15, so 14, okay, maybe. I mean, I looked at it and I said, it's really. I expect you to. I'm not the executive, so it's not my job to tell you what to do. But I would hope you guys doing this and actually knowing you, I know you're probably doing it very well. So I don't know. It needs to be in our policies. Policy 15 though, just seems like it's a duplicate of 11.
We could remove policy 1.4 and 1.5.
Thank you.
We don't want to streamline the permitting process. I feel like that's what builders have been complaining about.
I feel like that's been a huge problem that citizens and builders have had is our permitting process is so difficult for people to get through still. So streamlining that would be an asset to our community.
Like, are we missing something?
Oh, I just was looking through is like, I would hope we're doing that in general, that's a principle of the office of the executive, that they apply that not just to, I would hope you're applying lean principles to every aspect of government, right? And that you're trying to streamline all of the processes for the citizens.
Yes.
I'm like, does it really need to be in our plan? If council members think it's valuable and it's important, then that's okay.
I would say, yeah, we are doing that. We are working towards that. Some of the things working towards that is, going to the new Tyler program and all that kind of stuff is to streamline things and make things easier, faster, to get those things turned around. We've had multiple conversations about that particular aspect. I guess the question then comes down to, does it need to be in this document essentially, right?
Yeah, and our thought was simply, the state has just passed a new state law first, this was in our 2015 comprehensive plan. So it was a policy that the council wanted in 10 years ago when we adopted 2015 comprehensive plan. So we just rolled it forward because we, in principle, agree as well. But also the state passed a recent state law that was Senate Bill 5290, which amended RCW 3670B, really directing cities to look at how they do permitting to reduce those permitting timelines, kind of under the theory that, the longer we take to process permits, it could have an impact on property rights and development rights. And so kind of in that spirit, we kind of kept it as, and remember, this is also the policy statement for this council, that the council wants us to continue to look for ways to streamline the permitting process. It's not one of those, I would quote unquote say mandatory policies. We could live without it, but I think it reflects the council's desire to fix that. And we can eliminate 1.5 because it is a duplicate really of 1.1.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Just to kind of, when it says utilizing lean principles, is that the same meaning as when the military is talking about it, to eliminate waste? Okay.
You got LEAN capital.
So it's not an acronym.
It is an acronym.
It is?
LEAN capital.
In the military.
I think that's part of whatever that is. It's like Sigma, whatever, Leany, whatever, da 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 da.
Yeah.
I think it's how they.
Six Sigma principles. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Six Sigma principles of lean. I don't think it was meant to be an acronym. It's more of reflecting that management philosophy, which is why it was capitalized.
Cool. It's a good idea, right?
Sure is.
But we'll look to the council on what they want us to do with these two.
Yeah.
I'm okay if you want to keep 4. If the council feels like that's meaningful. I think if you've had it in there since 2015 and we're still working on it, I guess the question is, so I'm okay with 1.4. I think, thank you for 1.5, just because it was a duplicate.
The journey. It's a journey.
It is a journey. Yeah.
Not a destination. It's a journey.
Councilmember Davis, did you have something?
I was just gonna agree with what Councilmember Climate said. So I think we should just keep 1.4 in there since this is something we are continuing to work on. But 1.5, I think we can remove because it is a duplicate of 1.1.
Yeah, seems to be.
Councilmember Fullerton.
Yeah, I disagree a little bit. They both do pertain to property rights of the owners. But one is talking about the property rights of landowners shall be protected from arbitrary and discriminatory actions. Then up here on 1, it's saying that the residents shall be fully protected under the 5th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution and the United States Civil Rights Act. I think they both kind of serve a purpose unless we could just combine the two. If this is a policy that we've written, but this said, 1.5, private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation having been made. The property rights of landowners shall be protected from arbitrary and discriminatory actions. And then the other one is basically just talking about Civil Rights Act and then the Constitution, the 5th and 14th, but they say the same, but then they don't, because there's definite actions in 1.5 that are not in 1.1.
Yep.
Should there come a point where somebody feels like there's action being taken against them because the city or government wants their property for whatever arbitrary or discriminatory actions, they're not going to have that 1.5 to look at as a reference. They're only going to have the 5th and 14th amendments, which most people aren't going to take the time to look up. They're just going to be like, oh my God, somebody wants to take my land. And one of the arbitrary or discriminatory actions you could say is, part of your property is too close to Lake Tapps, let's say. So you can't put a gazebo next to Lake Tapps because because it's wetlands or it's too close to the water or whatever. So we're going to basically give you a regulation that you can't build on your property within 150 feet of water. So that could be arbitrary or discriminatory. And that could be something that needs to go to the court system to let the courts decide if that is an action that can be taken against the city, saying that this is arbitrary or discriminatory because I live on Lake Tapps.
So that sounds like that's
or-
already in the regulations though that you're referring to. And
Right, but if we're
that's-
saying we're going to delete the
Oh, right.
1.5, we're going to take it out of there, then, they wouldn't have that
You can leave it. in
wording
there.
arbitrary or discriminatory because that wording is not in 1.1.
Right, right.
It's specifically talking about the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act. So
Yeah,
I'm
but
just saying, I
Washington's-
feel like it should stay because, this gives added protection to people that have, homeowners or property owners that want to do something and they feel like, oh, maybe the city, like they might feel like the city created this arbitrary rule. So now I can't build a toilet in my house because I'm not allowed to have sewer.
There's lots of
system.
those
I don't
regulations
know,
though,
but I'm just
existing
saying.
today, though. But Washington State is really strong on, you can't take people's property in Washington State, unlike other states.
Right, but some of the GMA regulations that we're listening to that are being added because of HB 12,
And something.
whatever, feels like we're taking property because we're telling people you can't do something to your property because the GMA says so.
That's exactly
Right,
what we
so-
do. Yes.
Exactly. So that's why I'm saying we need to leave
Yeah.
any regulation that's a protection for property rights and for the landowners. Anything that they can fall back on that they can slap the city in the face if we, step over a boundary that they feel is, discriminatory or arbitrary. I say keep it there.
Yeah. That's
Let
fine.
them push back. Let them fight back.
That's fine. They're not going to be able to use that language. I don't disagree with it being in there. I don't really. My point is that the person is not going to be able to use that language to, be able to build their gazebo within 20 feet of Lake Tapps. But
No, I
understand.
know, and I don't live on Lake Tapps, but I'm just saying, I was trying to be,
Sure.
somebody, at least they have something that's in writing that they can fall back on.
Well,
And if they choose to go to court or take the city to
Right.
court or the state,
Well, right.
then they can at least
Right.
feel like they had their voice heard, right?
right.
Mr. Sullivan, do you want to respond to that?
Just to let you know where the language came from. it's verbatim right out of the Growth Management Act.
Mhm.
So RCW 3670A020, we just copied and pasted the language directly out of the Growth Management Act. So whether we have it in a policy or not, that's in the GMA. And so if there was ever a lawsuit, they could always fall back on that goal within the Growth Management Act. So you don't necessarily, not having it here doesn't necessarily remove it in its totality because it's right out of the Growth Management Act. So even if we don't have a policy on it because it's in the GMA, and if someone got into a lawsuit with us in theory, they could still go back to the goals of the Growth Management Act. So I guess removing it doesn't necessarily remove it from the planning framework because it's specifically those words verbatim are in the GMA.
Leaving it in is fine, then, right?
I just want to see what the
I
council,
was
So, yeah, I
just-
would-
was just making a point on,
like, can we get like a,
Okay, yeah, everybody want to
So,
say, yeah, I
do we-
think that's a good
I guess we
idea
can
or a bad idea?
whether we want
To leave it in or take it out? Because he needs a consensus of what we,
thumbs up, thumbs down, and thumbs down, we take it out? I mean, just,
so.
I'm not gonna cry if you leave it in. I'm just
Right.
trying to be, I'm just applying lean principles and maximizing the work not done.
I
Deleting
hear
things
that.
that look like duplicate.
That's all I was gonna say too, is just that the 14th and the Fifth Amendment say that you can't take somebody's property without due process. So it is a duplicate statement. So that was the only reason why I was saying that it could be removed, because if you were having a problem with your property, you're probably gonna go to the Constitution to look those two things up because it's in our thing. And you would realize that it says, hey, I have due process here, and then you could further it. So to me, it does seem like a duplicate and something that, like Councilmember Climate says, something that we could remove to kind of reduce it, some of the language in here.
Is it a big deal if it stays in?
No, I would not
I would say leave it in. then,
raise a big.
Based upon
Exactly.
number of people.
Councilmember Climens, do you just want us to go through your list of questions that you sent us and we can give the page numbers? Because Lauren was nice while we were all having conversations and went through and wrote on my notes both the current page number and the page number from the old packet.
Nice.
Oh,
So-
Lauren, you're amazing. Thank you.
So-
Well, I
So we
kind of
could
want to
just-
get, no,
can
I
start
don't,
at the
I don't know
top
if I
and-
want to punish the council with it. I mean, the feeling I'm getting from council, first of all, these are policies, they're not laws. Many of these are to protect the city so we can qualify for and meet standards. So we get that, and we may or may not have to take action on them. So you could go through mine, but I'm going to continue to look at these things and ask you questions. I tried to find the ones where I said, hey, can we delete these? And I have more, but I think if we punish them right now with that, I'm not sure it's going to make sense. I do want to punish them with one question though. On page 34 of the appendix, exhibit 23, I was struggling with this chart. I was wondering if
Let us catch up to you.
Yeah, we don't know where you're at.
We don't know.
We'll get there.
Our page 34 is purchase order conversion includes standard open POs.
page, oh, let me see. Oh, page 154, I'm sorry, of the packet.
Okay.
My bad. I was looking at the wrong page number. It's
good.
exhibit 23, racial composition of workers in residential workforce, Bonney Lake 2021. So I was trying to digest this chart. And one thing that stuck out to me is, do I want this to sum to 100
Actually,
if
no.
I'm using percentages?
Actually, no. And the reason is the first 6 categories are racial categories of race. I shouldn't say racial. They're race categories: white, black, Asian. The other one is an ethnic group. So you can be Hispanic and also white. You can be Hispanic and also black. So the first six add up to 100%. So if you take white, black, Asian, Islander, Asian, this one is Native Hawaiian and Pacific, and multiracial, and the first one's American Indian. I apologize. Thanks, Lauren. And put those together, that adds up to 100%. The next one, that last one, is an ethnic category. They could have representation in both that group and another specific race. And that's just the way the federal census is required to do that under a document. And is that in the current? Okay, so Lauren, based on Councilmember McClymon's comment, added an explanatory note. It's not in this version because we just added it. That explains that the first three are based on race. The last one is based on ethnic group. So yeah, you will get, if you add up all the numbers, you'll get more than 100.
Okay, and then my follow-up question for that was the first two sentences of your prose that describes Exhibit 23. Can you kind of help me digest that? Because I was trying to figure out how we got to that from the chart. The 5% looks like those are some startling statements that I'm not sure. It says that 5%, we're 5% more likely to be white than people who work in Bonney Lake.
So what we looked at, one of the things that you're looking at when you're looking at these types of
It's right under it.
analysis is people living and working in their same community. And the 5% is the delta between the number of people who work in the city of Bonney Lake who are white and the number of people who are white who reside in Bonney Lake and are part of the working population. So 87% of Bonney Lake residents who are in the working population are white, but only 82% actually work within the city of Bonney Lake. And that's where that 5% delta comes from.
Yeah, and I would caution you that you actually need to do the numbers and not use percentages, because there's the number of people working in Bonney Lake is a lot smaller than the number of workers in Bonney Lake. So subtracting the percentages isn't the same as saying if I have 400 people, white people in workers in Bonney Lake, but I have 8,000 workers living in Bonney Lake, and 7,000 are white. That might be 87% and 82%, but the difference is not 5%, right? It's probably a bit different, right? So I think you should show some math there, at least in a footnote, to make sure we get the right number, because I think just subtracting the percentages is an interest. Mathematically, the arithmetic works, but the mathematics do not.
We can try to rephrase that in the final version.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Kelly, kind of, you're looking at some stuff too that I was like confused about at the last meeting also, and thanks to staff for supplying some of the references to the actual data sets. But ultimately, and we had an entire class on this in AWC that I thought was really interesting. I think it was a couple of years ago. The representation of this data, like Kelly, just to Councilmember McClymonds mentions, is you can make these things look like a lot of different things, because there's a lot of the data is skewed around, and even to the extent of, if you look closely at some of the data, it's like this particular race is 0.6% of the population, and then they use that figure in the report, but yet the error, the plus and minus, whatever they call it, is like 0.8%. So when you try to look at this kind of data in such a small city, it's incredibly hard to do. Right?
We don't disagree with the critique of the data sets that we are allowed, that we have to work with.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly,
and,
yeah.
and
So,
there's a great book out there, How to Lie with Statistics.
yeah, there you go, right, yeah.
You know,
I know, right?
I'm all
You know,
aware of.
There's all kinds of fun you can have with that. So you
Yeah.
got to take it with a grain of salt, basically. I think that's my message is, 20 years from now, when somebody looks at this plan and says, well, you used me talking to me, that you used all this data. And it was like, yeah, I know it's not, it's what we had.
It's the data sets, it's the data sets that we have. And we're trying to make comparisons to look at, general trends. Are there
Yeah.
the same percentage of the population proportionately that's working in the city of Bonney Lake also able to live in the city of Bonney Lake?
Yeah.
And we're trying to address those requirements that we're getting out of the Management Act with the data sets that we have, knowing that those data sets they do have flaws. I'm not the great defender of the U.S. Census Bureau and their data gathering techniques.
It goes back to it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes.
Right. And so,
It is.
while I think having discussions on the housing equity report are really important to understand where we're coming at from the data, really this was staff's attempt to meet those requirements,
Yeah.
do the analysis, to do the evaluation
Yeah.
that then drives the policy. So even if there is concern sometimes maybe around the actual data, it's really, that's just what we were using to inform the policy. And I know what Councilmember Kleiman is going to say is that's why we need to get the data correct. And I agree. But there's also a limitation to what we can do with the data sets that we have.
Exactly,
Um,
yeah.
But we could try to add more explanatory text in the housing equity report before we bring it back for final adoption.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Yeah, it's funny that we look at this mathematical data here because in my science classes, we're getting ready to teach about how skewed research and data
Yeah,
is
that is a good book.
often skewed.
That is an excellent
Um,
reference that he mentioned. That was highly recommended.
Yes, yes.
Because you
I
could-
will say though, in regards to kind of this, which I think is a hilarious sentence here. But it's the one where it says, if none of the people working in Bonney Lake also live in Bonney Lake, this is up to 525 workers who are potentially excluded from housing in Bonney Lake. However, there are many other reasons that individuals may choose not to live where they work. And we know this is a bedroom community. We know that many of the reasons why
Mhm.
people choose that.
Yeah.
And a correlation should not be drawn from the available data, yet a correlation is being made. Right before
Right?
that.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Like I said, we're trying to
not a fan of Exhibit 23.
trying to balance
Then-
competing interests while recognizing the limitation of the data
yeah,
sets.
yeah. It looks good, though. It looks great, right? It meets the need of the regulatory framework to have that particular component in the report, I guess.
So let me ask the question
He's gonna-
then,
oh,
right? So
Hold
if
on
we
just a
look
sec. Hold on just a second.
They're conferencing.
They're having a little
They're-
conference.
they're
They're
doing
gonna
it.
tell us something and then we'll get right to
We're
it.
going to learn the lottery numbers here in
Yeah.
just a second. You don't want to break out your pencil here, so. Oh,
We're past it.
again.
Did anybody win?
Powerball numbers.
Can we go
I
home?
was like, I'm out.
If I did, I'm out. Yeah.
See ya.
Right.
Now we need the spare thing again.
I would have to actually play the lottery.
You do.
We better be getting a new park.
Right.
Yeah, I know, right? And we just had, Mayor
right.
Carter just volunteered. to play.
Right.
Ugh. I just
I think
Do we have any policies that are discriminatory that we know about? Because if we do, I'm a fan of getting rid of them. I mean, everybody,
I mean, it's
Well,
Agree.
there should be no reason people can't buy in Bonney Lake except for the fact they don't have the money, right?
so.
Right.
Let
Go
me,
ahead,
let me
Mr.
do
Sullivan.
this and then we'll circle to the next one. So I was talking with Lauren. I think what we're going to do is we're simply going to, we have two options. One, we can just pull out the percentages and describe the data in a qualitative sense, which is that Exhibit 23 shows that workers who live in Bonney Lake are more likely to be white than the people who work in Bonney Lake, which is what the data says, right? Without getting into the mathematical difference. Just a qualitative statement versus a quantitative statement. If this paragraph really still bugs the council, we can work to try to find a way to even streamline it even more. You know, we're looking to see what the council would like us to do. I mean,
It's not too much trouble. It'd be great to, in my mind, represent it more that way, you know?
Mhm.
more qualitative versus quantitative.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah, that's,
Councilmember Climens, would that help you as well if it was more of a qualitative statement versus a quantitative? This is where we move from engineering into the social sciences.
there you go, right?
Social scientists, we're not always about the exact number.
As long as as long as our plan clearly documents that, you know, is there a motivation or a reasoning for us to take action in order to resolve some injustice somewhere, right? In our policies, right? I mean, is the city practicing knowingly or unknowingly anything that is hurting people from achieving the American dream? That's, you know, regardless of who they are, right? So if you can write those words out of that data, then great. Because that's really what I'm concerned. I was looking to try to understand, do we have any real problems, right, in the city? Because I naively respect the work that John and Mayor Johnson and Mayor McCulloch and now Mayor Carter are doing to, you know, run a city in a fair way without discriminating over.
And I would say, no, I don't believe, I believe overall, and that's kind of what the housing equity report bore out is overall, the community is doing great, right? There are areas where we can make some improvements. And there's also language that different ethnic groups feel about things. They interpret those words differently. And so, you know, without getting into policy, you know, and I'm gonna give an analogy real quick because that way it's not political. Is if anybody's ever seen The Martian, there's a great scene where they're trying to explain to Matthew Damon how he's going to get from Mars back to Earth. They can only communicate by email. You can't read facial cues. You can only interpret the language that they're writing. And there's a whole debate on the ground about what he means when he writes some certain letters and certain words in his email.
Right.
One way is kind of funny and exciting. The other way is no way. You're really mean. So as we look at policy, different groups interpret words that we put in the comprehensive plan in different fashions. And so there are language that has been, for the vast majority of the society, not seen as exclusionary language, but then there's also language that has become language used to create, not necessarily, not saying in this community, to create those exclusionary principles. So one of the words that we removed is blight. Blight has become a word that has been synonymous with certain things. And so by removing that word, we're trying to improve our policy so that it is read by the majority of people to be as open and not exclusionary as possible.
What I was saying to Jason is really the other component of that is to be more descriptive of what you mean by that term. So instead of using kind of a catch-all term saying, hey, we are really trying to address housing that is unsafe for the occupant. Because at the end of the day, we want our citizens to have a safe place to live in the house that they're in, as opposed to blight, which could mean a variety of things. It could mean the trash on the outside. It could mean a roof that's caving in. It could mean overgrown vegetation. So what are we actually trying to get at with that term and to be clearer about the intent of that policy? So that's really where we were going with the recommendations in here. For Council Member McClymans, if you are so inclined, the racially disparate impacts guidance from the Department of Commerce, they did update the link since I created the document, but on their website, they provide the methodology for preparing this report. And on page
87 of that document, they describe this particular item, the comparison of workers to residents, if you're interested in reading that. And so I was using that methodology for this, since you seem to like the how of getting to the data.
Thank you.
So-
I will continue. I will do that as I continue to try to understand everything here.
Yeah.
Kelly,
And,
you
and
had-
I would say that just because we're saying something could have a racial disparate impact or it could be seen as exclusionary, doesn't mean that we're actually doing it in that way. And I will say this as a personal experience, most of the policies that we did this evaluation on were the policies I wrote in 2015. So they're the policies that I wrote in 2015 that Lauren ran through the analysis to make that conclusion. And so it's not that necessarily that we are actively doing anything or that the community or the city council is actively doing anything wrong. It's simply that we're saying that some of the terms that we use may not be the best terms to demonstrate a clarity around what we mean. And I know this, I've had conversations with council that really to be clear in our regulations as government is a paramount. So by changing some of the terms to be more clear by what we mean is important. And also to get rid of words that could be seen by different racial and ethnic groups as exclusionary so that we make sure that we are broadcasting kind of that message to the larger group. We don't have a history of redlining in the city. Tacoma is dealing with that right now. And I don't know if anybody knows what redlining is. And if you don't, I can.
We learned about it at the AWC.
Yeah. We don't have a history of redlining in the city. We look through our plats and short plats. We don't have plats that have the specific racial covenants on them that excluded people from purchasing in those neighborhoods for 30 or 40 years before those provisions were struck down. So on a lot of instances, we are doing that. And the data backs it up in the report, right? Overall, every ethnic group and racial group in the city of Bonney Lake is doing well. There's areas we can improve. That's with everything. And as we look at the policies, it's not to say that this policy is necessarily wrong. It's just how do we structure the policy to be clearer and to be able to read by anybody to know what we're actually meaning and not what, and get rid of the things that could create illusions of things that we don't mean.
Kelly, did you have one? I noted on your stuff that I thought noted something about the plaza and the gateway thing to mention. There was one of the policies or regulations goals on that. And I think that was because the reason I mentioned that was there's a specific example that I thought was of interest possibly of the new car wash that was built over there on 410 by the Wendy's area. And there was a big plaza area associated with it or not. And I didn't clearly understand whether the developer had that in their plan originally or whether they were required to do that by some particular policy or regulation, how that came about.
We're going to look up that policy so we can have that conversation. I'll address the car wash first. It was not from a specific regulation or policy. What it was the downtown design guidelines had provisions in there that wouldn't have allowed parking right on 410 like they currently have. The downtown design guidelines said, hey, you could provide us with an alternative strategy that meets the intent of all of these things. What would you propose? That's what they proposed as an alternative strategy to meeting don't have parking, have your building right up on 410, and creating a pedestrian feeling like that way, like we did with the BLT right across the street. They made the argument that it really doesn't work there. What if we did a pedestrian plaza instead and did it this way? And we said, Dad, that looks like a great plan, and worked with them on that. So that was a more of a unique situation where we were working through where the code and what they were wanting to develop were not lining up and trying to find an alternative path forward. It's specifically on page 228 of the current packet, page 325 of Councilmember Kleiman's previous packet. It was a goal that says it was, I'll wait, you guys there? It was a goal or a policy that said require new development projects provide gateway features in their locations and context with warrant and such inclusion. This was a policy from 2015. It's not a requirement by state law. It's not a requirement by CPPs. If the council would like to have that policy removed, we would just need to see the quick thumbs up from the council and we can remove that policy. It's, yeah, we would basically remove goal 5, policy 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3.
Which page again, please?
Page
228.
228 of the matrix, which is the matrix. And then Councilmember Kleiman, that's on 325 of the packet you're looking at, because I know you have the older one up.
Are these the
I
same
could
types?
endorse. I'm sorry, Councilmember Hoover.
Baldwin,
Oh,
sorry.
thank you.
It's hard to see. on
Sounded
this.
like it.
I'm assuming 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 has everything to do with the corridor, right? The
Correct.
410 corridor, which I'm assuming those are really similar probably to places like Leavenworth, right? They probably have something like that. If you create a business, it has to look a certain way. And
Mhm.
And this was just more like as you drive into the city, having gateways that says you're entering the city.
So would this apply? Would we be saying, so let's say somebody builds wants to build something out on 214th as you're entering Bonney Lake there, do they have to put a big thing saying, this is our great big new development, it's amazing, welcome to it? Or is this more, I mean, I thought there were multiple gateways in the city, not just on 410, and that these were gateways into
Welcome to Easttown.
Yeah. So if you look at Councilmember McClymonds is right. On page 103 of your packet, Councilmember McClymonds, I don't have that map in the old packet. But there is a map that shows kind of where, yeah, it might be 203 around that area. There's a map that shows kind of all the gateways that are in the city.
103.
Yeah, page 103.
Got it.
And so the thought would be when we're doing development in those areas, are we working to find ways to add gateways? So if you come in from 233rd, when Bob Stobie built his project, we worked with him to create a little area there right at the corner where there's a welcome to Bonney Lake sign. There's some banner locations. That would be an example. When we did the park improvements on the wall, we put welcome to Bonney Lake right there on the wall below the volleyball beach area. And so it's just as we're doing kind of improvements on where those gateways would be looking to find ways to add that kind of, you are entering the city of Bonney Lake signage. And there's both primary and secondary. The primary are the more larger ones. Like the other one that's shown on the map is the Ascent Park as a primary gateway as well. But the policies themselves are not state mandated, RCW mandated. They were more policy directions of the city.
Councilmember Hubler.
So I guess some of my, just because I learned so much about like what's going on at the Sasquatch car wash and them being required to put a sign in that says welcome to downtown Bonney Lake, but they have to permit it and they have to pay for all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I think, again, it comes down to this is somebody else's property and we're regulating, telling them that you must put a sign up that says welcome to or, something about the city of Bonney Lake, and they have to pay for a permit and we require it. And there's no getting around that. So I guess I personally have a problem with that.
Well, and that's what I was trying to say is what happened with Sasquatch Car Wash was not driven by these policies at all.
But the city of Bonney Lake sign is, correct?
Nope.
Because isn't that a gateway?
Nope.
The gateway's down further.
So they chose.
Yes, that's what I'm saying is I'm trying to separate the two because when they came in their initial proposal, under the downtown design guidelines, which weren't part of this, isn't part of this policy debate, was all the buildings had to be up against 410. You had to have pedestrian entrances from the building onto 410. You couldn't have parking along 410. But there's a provision in the design guidelines that says you can propose an alternative design that meets the intent of this, and we will consider it. That was the design that their architect proposed to us, and we accepted it. So there wasn't a regulation that says you had to add a downtown Bonney Lake sign, you had to add a pedestrian plaza. That was part of a negotiated permitting process so that they didn't follow the strict application of the code. It wasn't, if these policies were completely wiped off the books and never as they've existed, it wouldn't have impacted the discussion around the Sasquatch Car Wash.
I have a second part to that, I guess.
Yeah, if you want to
then.
follow up.
Sorry. So like thinking about that, then the other side of the street and that same side of the street, it's all parking on the side of Highway 410. All the buildings are set back. So I don't understand like why their regulation and BLT's regulation would be set on the front of 410 with pedestrian access to the front of it if everybody else on 410 is parking lots and then buildings.
Because those were built before those regulations existed.
The actual building.
The Sasquatch Car Wash was a vacant property. And they came in to do wasn't vacant, had the Java Angels on it, but they were completely demolishing the Java Angels and
Unlike the BLT, which was not a new building, it's absolutely the same building that was in the same spot.
well, and
Just
there's a different provision that they fell under because of the amount of remodel that they did on that building compared to the value of the building
close.
triggered some different improvements. But that's where that comes from. It's not, we don't look out there and say, oh, because everybody else did it, you don't follow the current regulations.
When was that policy put into place?
This policy was put into place in 2015 when I wrote the comprehensive plan. Well, actually, I think it might have been in the 08 comprehensive plan, but the downtown design guidelines, John, do you remember when those were adopted? Yeah, 2008, 2007.
So I guess that's where I have a problem that we changed something and everybody else is one way and then somebody else is being told all of a sudden, hey,
It's new.
you have to do it this way. So I think those are things that we as a council need to look at, maybe kind of unregulating some things to make it more uniform rather than
2007 when the design, but you will always find that, throughout the city. Zoning regulations change as cities change and grow. And, I mean, that's just a constant struggle. Anytime someone tears down a building, they have to comply with the new regulations.
Councilmember Baldwin.
Piggybacking off of.
This policy and that are completely, this policy was not driving that conversation. Sorry.
Please go ahead.
Okay, yeah, piggybacking off of Councilmember Hubler, though, take away the Sasquatch situation, like, okay, whatever, there's a reason for it. But even with that, if it does apply to a specific business, it still applies, right?
Correct. And we're saying council.
Where we're saying you need to do this and you need to pay for this and it falls on them. I think like when you look at her original concern, fine, Sasquatch, whatever. Okay, but it still applies if it's not Sasquatch and it's another place that has to fall under that regulation.
And all of the information about the gateway, primary gateway, all of these policies can be deleted by the city council. They're not state mandated. They're not state required. They're not for an MPP. This was a lost.
That's,
He
yeah,
was-
Councilmember
his
McClymon's
internet
internet
was
was going
interrupted.
down, and so he is out.
Okay.
But he
That-
said he could get rid of policy CDLU5, and he's out.
And so all of this stuff about Gateway could be eliminated by the city council if that's what they wanted to do. This was something that was put in by the previous city council in 07, 08. They really wanted to have gateways when people came into the city and developers built in those areas. They wanted the developers to build those gateways. That was a council decision in 07, 08. We've just continued to roll those policies forward. If the current council wants to still delete all those, that is 100% within the council's discretion. And we would just look for,
What do you guys think? I mean, I have the same issue with it as well.
I don't,
The setback.
my
Yeah.
personal opinion is I don't think that should be in there. If we as a city want to put things in and
Yeah,
build
that
things,
we-
I don't think developers should have to put those in.
Right, but again, remember, and I agree with what you're saying, that this policy did not drive any of what we talked about.
Right. No, I understand that, but
But moving forward.
So one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you're doing a downtown-ish area, let's say this area across the street over here, and we're building something up there that we want to look a certain way or something, then these might have to, like you might want to have those types of regulations or no? I don't.
I mean, it's always good to have, as we negotiate, because these aren't development regulations, these are policies. So remember, we're not saying these are shall statements. These are, we should
Should.
consider, and it's as we negotiate and work with developers, these are the policies that we look at for direction. So there's a couple options. The council could leave everything that relates to gateways. The map, the kind of discussion around gateways, which starts on page 101 of the packet. Just what are gateways, primary, what they are. And then under the policy section, we could, there's a whole section, and we could do this however the council wants, and I'll look for your direction.
Councilmember Baldwin.
I can definitely see the need for, gateway. I can understand maybe if there's a lot of properties that are owned, and then maybe we need some sort of whatever we need in that area. But I feel like I don't think we should get rid of it altogether, because I can see the benefit of it, but I do think maybe the wording needs to change to say something to the effect of up for negotiation between, property owner and city, to have these things so that there can be a conversation between,
Mhm.
who's going to pay for it? What is the expectation? What would you, and then leave it, I don't know. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
Councilmember Davis.
Yeah, and so when I'm looking at those the 5.3 is the only one that I'm seeing on there that says requires new development to provide a gateway feature. And so I think that's the one that I think, from what I'm hearing and kind of agreeing with here, that we should be removing require, and then, but keeping the conversation there to be able to be had.
I just want to make sure, like for me personally, as I think about, as the developers coming in, I don't want it to be something where it's left up to an individual person within the city to try and push, like, an experience that I had down in Sumner was it was left up to interpretation of the city's,
Enter.
not the engineer, but the assistant to the engineer or something like that, was left up to him to interpret what the code was going to be. And I don't think we should have anything that's up to interpretation. I think it should be a black and white, this is how it will be, or this is how it won't be. So I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying. These are the policies that then drive the adoption of the regulations, which are the should and the shall statements, right?
Okay.
So these are always going to be interpretable because they're policies. The other option is, so we could delete it, which staff is completely fine with. If there's a concern of wanting to have it so you can have the conversation, is we could eliminate it, or we could change required to encourage. Whichever way the direction the council goes. If we do remove the policy, we will need to do some work on the design guidelines because there are some areas where they would have to do some gateway work. But that would be work that we would follow up once the comp plan gets adopted.
I'll just say that I would like to see the word required removed and changed to encourage, but the policy still kept in there about gateways, because I think it is important as people come into our city that they have that presence, that they know the city that they're entering into.
Councilmember Baldwin, Councilmember Hubler.
Thumbs up, thumbs down, maybe on.
Oh, I'm
You
sorry.
Good.
Something.
Yeah.
I hesitate on it just because I know we have signs already all over City of Bonney Lake that says welcome to Bonney Lake and you're entering Bonney Lake city limits. So having that even part of, I mean, I understand if
I think
somebody,
it's useless now, basically.
yeah, I kind of do think it's useless. Do we need it? Do we have enough signs that already say it? Do we want to make that a pressure point? If we even say encourage, that could become a pressure point for someone to feel like they are kind of being pushed to do something like that in developing any part of the city.
Right, and I don't know if it's directly in reference to, Mount Rainier's view when you come up 410, right? That to me is, when you talk about gateways, that's one of the featured kind of views of Bonney Lake, and that's an iconic, if we could just get rid of those stupid power lines.
That would be amazing.
So anything that kind of supports that, but doesn't necessarily require it, I think I support what Councilmember Davis is talking about, to very much encourage it, right? Because it's always up to negotiations. I don't know.
So,
This one, we're really looking for the council. This is one of those ones that you're not going to get a lot of
I was
pushback either way, because this is a council policy that we just carried forward.
We don't want anything required, it
Right,
sounds like.
you just change the word
That's our
required to
issue.
encourage.
I'll make sure there's no pressure put on someone to
Sure.
feel like they have to do something.
That's all it is. That's
You're
all we do
encouraged,
is
but not
regulate everything.
I highly encourage you to.
Mhm.
I lowly
That's what I don't
encourage
like.
you.
Or are you forced?
And this is all when it comes to, when things are encouraged, it's, oh, you want us to give on this standard? If you want us to give on this
Yeah,
standard, then
yeah.
do this instead.
Yep.
And the design guidelines that talk about downtown and what we call the Central Triangle, which is Veterans Memorial Drive, 410 and Main Street. That's the Central Triangle. There is documentation about encouraging gateways in there. And we can have discussions about those regulations going forward. But yeah, if it's encouraged or stricken, completely up to the council.
Vote encouraged.
Encourage.
It's fine.
Agree. You're okay.
It's not.
Encourage. Looks like encourage. Yay. Any further discussion?
Or more to Kelly's.
Oh, we have
Okay.
How late did you want to be here?
I mean, we could quickly go through them if you would like to hear, and then we can email Kelly our written response, Councilmember McClymonds, our written responses. However the council wants us to kind of do that.
Could you respond all council to his questions?
As long as we don't.
Just don't reply.
You don't
Yeah.
reply all.
Yeah,
Or don't reply all.
yeah, we can blind copy.
Yeah.
That's totally fine.
That would be awesome.
Works.
Then we just know what he's asking and it would help us to know, like, did we miss something?
Sure.
Go right to it.
And then what do you want us to do for next steps? Because right now this is coming back next week for a vote.
Oh,
If not, or
It's good to me.
Well, it doesn't mean that we have to vote on it. Remember, if all of a sudden Kelly's questions have a whole bunch of more stuff for us to talk about, we can then delay it again, unfortunately, if we have to, or if we need to.
Or if it doesn't, you can vote.
Yes. Or if it looks like we're all,
Positive.
good to go, then we can vote on it. We're good to go. But
I'm not hearing any significant problems. Yes, this is the time where you guys say, oh, wait a minute, I need more time on this or what have you, because.
Well, I
we could
said
do-
the significant problem, but according to, what is it, RCW 36.70.A200 says they're forcing you to do it.
Right, there's
That
always
is a
those.
concerning one.
Yeah. There's always those.
Fair.
But I'm hearing putting it on the next agenda for a vote so that we can move on. And the reason I ask about that is because the staff wants to get closure on this particular point. And Councilmember.
Yeah.
Are any of Councilmember McClymont's questions, are they on the RCW side where it's a required addition, or is it like over policy or over, something that could be deleted without?
It really is a mixture. Some of it's language in the actual narrative, like that whole discussion around Exhibit 23. Some of them are discussions around specific policies that are tied to RCWs. Some of them are that discussion we had around, well, the policy isn't required, like the providing relocation assistance isn't specifically required. It's what we chose as our way of trying to implement another requirement. So it's kind of a spattering of all of those. And the other reason that we're asking is next week on the council agenda, October 1st, is we're bringing the 2-year CIP to city council for the 25-26 biennium. And we've figured that's going to take us about an hour and a half. So if we feel like there's going to be a long discussion with this, I would say we need to try to figure out how to work that in there.
Let me ask you this. How many questions does he have?
Some of them we've already talked about.
Yeah.
Okay.
Will you remove those? I guess we could just see. Yeah. We could skip over those. Okay. That'd be great. Okay, thank you.
This is why we brought Lauren in, because she's
Yeah.
3 times
Oh,
smarter
yeah,
than
you
me.
were already talking about her last week. Yeah.
And then once you send that out, obviously, if you have questions, please respond to Jason as quickly, or Lauren as quickly as possible, so they can get you answers, so that either they can make adjustments, or we can bring it forward for that vote then. Fair.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion on this topic?
Mm-mm.
All right. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Get my kid.
That.
My neighbor's house.
Perfect.
Because tonight, my Lisa